Hello, everybody. This is Lauren Kelly from Opexengine, and welcome to our webinar today, Best Practices to Improve Recurring Revenue Forecasting. As people are joining, I'm going to take a minute or two and give people more time to join. We've got an awful lot of people signed up today, so I can see the attendee numbers going up. Maybe I'll move forward into the housekeeping. Let's see if I can. Sorry, I'm going to have to. Sometimes Zoom has this problem with the buttons, and it makes my computer buttons not work. There we go. All righty. So just a little bit of housekeeping as people are still joining. This is an interactive discussion. We're happy to hear as many questions as we can get to today. So please post them in chat, and we'll get to as many as we can, either at the end or if we can handle it during the conversation. Please do not raise your hand during our Q&A session. I think that's from a previous webinar that we were doing. But also anyone who's registered will get a copy of this presentation and a link to the webinar recording. But with that, I want to take a minute or two and talk about the topic, why we decided to pick this topic. Welcome our panelists, who I'm excited to have here today, and jump into the subject matter. So this is a great topic because I think people forget the devil's in the details when you go from your forecast in your CRM to having to accurately forecast revenue, and particularly in a subscription world, and especially as pricing models are changing and time series are changing. And we've got two great speakers today who can share with us both their experience, some of the difficulties that they've had, and also what they found has helped them. So for anyone on the call, I see from the attendee list a lot of our customers and our benchmarking community, but for anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Lauren Kelly. I'm the CEO and founder of Opexengine. And Opexengine is a give-to-get benchmarking platform, an independent third-party platform to benchmark not just financials, but operating metrics for really a 360 view for a typical B2B software and SaaS company. And we've worked with hundreds and hundreds of companies. We have almost 1,000 companies in our platform today. And we also are quite excited because in September, just a couple months ago, we were acquired by Bain & Company, a partner of ours that we've been working with for a long time. And we're very excited about the opportunity to work with Bain's tremendous expertise and resources to bring their expertise in strategic consulting and in building enterprise value and bring that to our customers in the mid-market. So with that, I really want to introduce my speakers today. Ted, I've known you for what, almost 10 years?
10 years, yeah. Yeah,
you were
a while.
Yeah, exactly. You were an early customer of Opexengine in your previous company, and you just bring a tremendous wealth of experience to this particular topic, and we'll talk about what you've done with that.
Yep.
And then Kevin, the CFO at Accurate, I'm thrilled to also have here today and to learn more about how you've dealt with this problem. So with that, what I want to do, is just, Ted, tell us a little bit. We know each other from your previous company,
Sure.
But I wasn't living the problems that you were having at that company in terms of revenue forecasting. So
yeah,
introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ted Sarantellos. I'm the CEO of Ravana now. Yeah, I met Lauren when I was at Telogis. I ran operations there, and as we mentioned, it was 10 years ago, which is in SaaS time. We were sort of crawling, I think, at that point, Lauren. So we were obsessed with metrics from sort of day one, because we were, as everyone else was at that point in time, trying to figure out how you really measure a subscription company. And I met you, Lauren, just because we were obsessed with benchmarking, and back then just using your product was really helpful for us getting our arms around this. We did numbers on pretty much every aspect of the business. How on the forecasting side, though, it was a pretty interesting piece. We were actually our software was in the fleet management space. So we had it was a SaaS model, but we had a little bit of intricacies in what we did because it was an IoT business. So we had hardware and the software component. And one area, as we were sort of moving toward taking our first outside round after bootstrapping for a number of years, we were growing and scaling, and we got to the point where we had a lot of salespeople, more than we had, and we're trying to manage that growth. And we were seeing we were hitting our bookings. The bookings look great. Those part of the numbers were good, but we just were not seeing the revenue growth the way that we expected it. And part of our issue was when we put these boxes and vehicles, there was a time horizon of getting them installed and then rolling up the revenue on that customer over time as we put those things in. So it wasn't a really simple SaaS model, but from that, we started to see there were gaps, right? And this is where the operational piece came in. And it stemmed from just the sales piece not being as sufficient as it should have, to the implementation team, to billing, all those issues that we were starting to run into, as a growing company back then. And so how did I sort of start solving it back then? And it was really challenging, was we just threw bodies at it. Kevin and I actually met at Telligis. He was the sort of the finance lead on this issue, and it's good to have us both together again, reopening old wounds. So it became a piece where we really had to manually, pull all this information from a variety of places. The age-old technology issue of getting your sales information, your finance information together, and we had to really just get those people to work more closely. So
this might be a great time to jump over to Kevin so he can tell what it was like to do that manually at that point. So welcome, Kevin. Love to hear your experience with us and what it was like working back then and what it's like now.
No, it's as Ted said, starting a decade ago was kind of a little bit earlier in the days of SaaS and multiple revenue recognition models. So there's a lot of challenges, right? Where you're trying to use a sales team who's operating one system, and then you have actuals in a different system, and then you're trying to figure out how to integrate that. And not only is that just trying to merge it, but then to Ted's point, to try and understand where are the bookings translated into revenue, and then managing how is that revenue being forecasted. There's a lot of dependencies between the teams and the systems, and that level of complexity, it varies by company, it varies by go-to-market model, but it's every business has it. Every business is trying to really look at that on a daily or weekly basis to understand it. So, at Telligis, as Ted said, there was a lot of evolving things. And, ever since then, I've been in kind of software and SaaS, IoT, and every business is looking at this, from whether it's you have distribution partners or you direct sell SaaS. It is a complex issue that you are trying to work through with your sales team to get their visibility and then translate to an executive level of where is the business going.
And you went to Accurint after the acquisition of Telligis by Verizon?
So I've had a couple of different stops since then. So I went to a company called Connexent, which was a Soros Funds owned company that sold to a large public strategic called Synaptics up in the Bay Area. And then I was at a CPaaS company called Ytel here in Orange County as well. So each one of those has different flavors in models in terms of how they go to market and sell with their customers. So every stop has had a different challenge of trying to understand the revenue and how to forecast it.
And then I understand Accurint was what, a week ago acquired by another
Yeah.
company?
About 10 days ago, last Monday, we closed an acquisition with GBG Group in the UK. It's a public company, and we're quite thrilled to have that all done and be part of the GBG family.
Yeah, congrats. That's terrific. So
Thank you.
for both of you, but to Ted, I remember when Telligis was acquired by Verizon, and I remember we had a CFO meetup in either Southern California or Northern California, and just went around the room and asked everyone, it must have been in December, because typically I would ask the question, what is your board looking for in terms of KPIs that's different this year than last year? And your colleague, Neha, said, well, we've just been acquired by a telecom services company, and the KPIs don't match up at all with what we do as a SaaS company. So we're trying to figure that out. So how did you, by the time you were able to have a huge exit from Telligis, how did how did you make the revenue forecasting accurate enough that you could get the kind of valuation and the sale to such a big company?
Yeah, I think us putting the focus and effort into this actually helped. I mean, the fact that we were so successful, I think, all stemmed from the fact that we had our stuff together, at least at that point in time. Yeah, the due diligence, probably when we did the raise was probably the point where we were most stressed about this. But by the time, we got to 2016 at that point in time, I think we had our arms around it pretty well. And we were rolling out OEM relationships, which were even more trickier. But really having sort of built that muscle a bit over those previous years, I think made the process go a lot better. And it's funny, when I left, how I sort of got to here today was, I chalked it up to, it was us. We had growing pains. We just didn't know what we were doing. And it was these conversations post Telligis with the gent that actually founded Ravana, Greg. He was dealing with this in the manufacturing side. So I mean, I started thinking about it, and I'm like, this is a lot bigger issue than I was even imagining. And as we dug into it further, as Kevin mentioned, you see this. It's one of those problems that's out there, but sort of because it sits in the weeds a little bit in between two groups. It's not been really managed as well as it could be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's part of the overall issue that companies really need integrated systems and integrated metrics, and whether it's the CRM with revenue forecasting or a whole variety of SaaS is really a flywheel of a variety of different operations that all need to be connected. And we're with fits and starts getting from a traditional world where you had a much more siloed organizations and the systems were fine for each individual organization, and now everything needs to be connected, and then you add subscriptions to that. It makes it a lot more complicated.
Yeah, the funny part though is, Lauren, it's like the metric of which you are valued is revenue growth when it all comes down to it. I mean, the bookings, our bookings, you can do the high fives all day long on bookings, but if the revenue isn't growing at that rate, I mean, it is truly the one piece that will get you the valuation you're looking for when you're in a SaaS company.
Absolutely. So Ted, why do you think subscription companies have such difficulty? Because they do tend to be more metrics driven. Mm-hmm. Why is there that difference, but that difficulty of marrying the sales forecast and the revenue forecast?
Yeah, and it's it's the shift. I think we're seeing it getting better. And a lot of this was the system. I mean, the CRM tools that we had in place, even in the 2012-13, like using Salesforce back then, I always struggled in the fact of how little we had in the platform on the translation of sales to revenue. I felt like we were using it more in a contact database than an actual operational database. So we put a lot of money into that part of the equation, and really linking our CRM, having it be more operational. But even with that, you know, it became this sort of gap, right? Of the sales team working sort of in their own world and then throwing things over the fence. And then the finance team, knowing the recognition models, would then do their best with the data that they had to really transform that data into something that would look like a revenue forecast. And really the fact that it wasn't real time, because it became so manual, and we still had this challenge even to the end, right? In the last company, was, you know, you did this in a bi-weekly basis, or, you know, once a quarter. I mean, you weren't actually able to get the eyeballs on this just because of that disconnection. And like we've already, it's on the slide right now, the fact that, you know, SaaS can be really simple or it can be really hard. It depends how the revenue models you have. You know, companies that bill, you know, in advance and have it out there, nice, not that difficult. But when you actually have these sort of, you know, but there's this different way we sell around, you know, consumption. We talk about, you know, ramp times of rollouts to enterprise customers and those types of things. That's where things get difficult in our view.
Yeah, I think, you know, as SaaS has evolved from sort of more of a cookie cutter approach of selling very similar things, when you have this incredible focus on growth, and you have this incredible focus on, you know, net dollar retention, which net dollar retention should really just be named, you know, what is my expansion, you know, my land and expand. And otherwise, if you don't do that, you're not going to have an increased net dollar retention. You might have customer retention.
Yep.
And so to do that, you have to have additional modules, you have to have additional, you know, products that you can increase your revenue with a particular customer. So, you know, Kevin, in the different companies that you've worked at, how has this worked out?
Well, I mean, I think the challenge there, as had said, is there's multiple revenue models for each company. I mean, the evolution of even on a pure SaaS company can go to market in different ways. And so understanding how is the sales team looking at that versus how is the finance team looking at that, for each model, there's complexity. And so that, you know, forecasting transactional API revenue has its own unique challenges. Forecasting implementation for, you know, IoT company, like Ted said, that's a whole different conversation. You need to have that information from the sales team to have that visibility. So I think there's a lot of complexity around there that requires kind of the departments to coordinate. But having it in structured data is step one. Even if you are doing analysis in Excel or offline or in a BI tool, at least having a starting place where you can have that structured data is critical. And I think that's where hopefully most people are today.
We have somebody's raised their hand. I'll do it this one time, but then I think going forward, if everyone could put their questions into chat. But Heather, if you'd like to speak, I've just unmuted you, or given you the ability to unmute yourself. I don't know if Heather can hear that. Okay, there we go. Heather, did you want to ask a question? Okay, let's move any questions into chat. I think that'll be a lot easier. So, excellent. So, let's just talk a little bit about consumption-based pricing, because that's sort of the hot topic of the season. How the heck do you, so you have a CRM, you have salespeople who are selling deals left, right, and center, and your pricing model is based on consumption-based pricing. And how do you get the salespeople to forecast what a minimum, you know, amount of usage might be. And if there's any, if you want to even forecast any kind of variability around that. How do you do that?
Yeah, I can.
Good
Want me to
luck.
take that one, Lauren?
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
that'd be great.
and yeah, as you mentioned, we are seeing this model a lot more in the space. And even, and it's not a really new model, right? If you think of manufacturing companies or even companies in places like life sciences, the way that they model their sales are via expected consumption. So what we view on this is one thing, just how do you build visibility of the entire, you have your entire pipeline and sales forecast, and then having the ability to then take what a typical customer's consumption model will look like. And it can vary, right? You can have, depending on the region, the product, et cetera, can you model at least at a baseline how people typically consume? And does that consumption vary by seasonality? Does it vary by, you know, like I said, customer size, et cetera? How do you actually take that piece, at least as a start, and model off of those deals what that consumption model would look like? How people are doing it well is then taking those models, and for their deals, the sales team can actually being able to adjust those prior to close to provide more visibility and giving real-time insight to how that would look. But then it becomes even more critical of how you get better at it, I guess, would be the one thing, is when that deal closes, taking that snapshot of what you thought that commitment was in that consumption model, and then tracking against that as the deal actually comes to fruition, and still managing it even post-close. And updating, you know, how that is rolling out, because on some customers that we have, it's a year, it could be a year rollout to get to that final edge of piece of revenue where they expect it to be at the end when it's becoming recurring. Being able to manage that over that period of time post-close is something we see as being a pretty critical skill, and then looking at how well you're realizing against it too.
And I think, Ted, just to follow up on that, I think what's critical is if you're the one who's selling the software, you need to know the complexity better than your customer. Because a lot of times if a customer is implementing a solution, whether it's API based or whatever that is, they may be inherently optimistic in their assumptions. So we'll give you a forecast. Oh, we plan to roll out here, here, and here in this time frame, and let's go ahead and put that in the forecast. Well, if you know that oftentimes they don't have the dedicated resources, or it takes them a little bit because they're going to be in a test environment before they go to production or whatever it is, you need to build that into your forecast. And so understanding that your experience as the vendor and understanding how your customers consume and implement the software, sometimes it requires that you're not going to challenge them, but you're going to make modifications to that forecast on the backside.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, I mean, so you're talking about when you have an implementation or a rollout, or you have a customer who, you know, may sort of like we used to say, our eyes are bigger than our stomach. You know, you're at a buffet and you take too much. So it's sort of traditional recognized revenue, you know, processing of being fairly conservative of, you know, when is the delivery of the service, and, you know, that usually finance plays that conservative role of, you know, being the ones who would say, well, you know, this usually takes 3 months, and sales and even the customer may say, no, we can get it up and running in a month. Absolutely, not a problem. So are there things that you would recommend putting into the CRM so that you're making sure that that your sales organization is, you know, kind of stepping through the process with the customer to help you on the finance side when you're reading that, to give you that information to be able to make the right estimate? And I'll give that to Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is an organization. You have to have a clear path from getting from signature to getting a fully ramped rev rec, right? What are the steps that are required to do that? And whether it's shipping of hardware, it's a professional services engagement, it's provisioning just software licenses, you know, whatever that is, you have to have a clearly defined process and you need to know how long that each of those steps take. Sometimes large enterprise customers can move faster because they have resources. Sometimes they're very conservative and they move slower. So, but you need to know how, how each cohort moves through that process. If you don't understand how you're getting from order to cash, that's probably where you really want to start, and have a clearly defined step-by-step, guide for the organization. From there, I think it comes down to making sure that the teams are talking, because projects push, timelines push, things of that. And so having that constant dialogue, that feedback loop, is really helpful. I think one of the things that I've always tried to focus on is looking at when did it close, and then when did we actually go live. Understanding what that latency looks like will help be a good roadmap, because again, sometimes it's, depending on the organization, sometimes buying more software is easy. Someone just provisions a seat or a license and it takes a matter of hours. But a lot of the APIs today, the complex platforms, those are taking weeks, months, quarters to get successfully implemented, designed, tested. And so you need to have that understanding of how long is this really going to take.
It's great. I want to call out something that you said, because traditionally we talk about, getting the order to cash process in place and making sure that that's all optimized. But what it sounds to me like you're really talking about is, in order to do the revenue forecasting, you need to have the order to implementation or order to full usage process really mapped out, which is a nuance. It's different than getting cash from the customer, which, just make sure you have all the billing and the invoicing process in place. But as a finance organization, you also have to have the process in place to make sure you're on top of the implementation or the usage or whatever. Ted, from your experience, do you see that nuance difference in the finance process?
Yeah, in general, I mean, I think because we are straying a bit from, the normal subscriptions. I think it's all can be looked at somewhat the same, especially from the on the onset of forecasting just a pipeline. We talked about, you said, what do you need to know, right? It's really the view here is to manage in real time, if you have all the data, what the shifts in what's going on in your business are, how they are impacting your forecast. So from a basic SaaS contract, it could be the fact that the revenue start date is the signature date. That's there. So when the pipeline does move, or your sales team is shifting, when they think things are closed, that will materially affect what your growth rates could look like, because the timing that it's being done. Our view is some of this information is just not happening quickly enough, right? The point is that the translation of that booking into when the deal will hit, the waterfall would be the best way to say it, of that revenue hitting is there. And in most companies, I think where they struggle is because some of this stuff can get complicated if you don't have all the data, is they focus on a very small portion of the business, right? They're not looking at it overall. And having sort of an ability to have this consistent process in the sales cycle provides the visibility no matter what model you have. It's that instead of looking at the 10%, because that's what you can really manage from a finance team perspective, or that's all you really want to look at, and rolling that out, you have a view of everything and how it would move as the pipeline moves, or the dates, close dates, etc.
And I would just say to further, to further that, having just gone through the sell side process, the focus on revenue forecasts and margin forecasts based on sales models is, as Ted said, SaaS companies are all about revenue, and that's exactly how a lot of our focus was. And we actually had put in Ravana earlier this year, and having that kind of organized data allowed us to iterate and move a lot faster. We had previously had models in Excel that did the same thing, but the latency, the waiting for it, that was our challenge. So I think translating the sales forecast from our CRM with Ravana allowed us to really, be better and be faster.
Yeah, no, I think that's fabulous, because I know from the work that we do, and also, just being in the industry, that a lot of acquirers are now, and also a lot of, some of the PE firms, they don't trust what they're getting from the finance organization of a target company. And so they're going directly into the company's, back-end systems themselves, and, pulling the Zuora or SAS Optics or, the revenue numbers, and they're going into the CRM, and they're trying to do it themselves because they don't feel a level of comfort with, and then that obviously affects the negotiation and the valuation from, LOI to close, which obviously, you don't want to change to happen at that point, as we all know. So, and then, talk a little bit about how obviously revenue is the basis for a lot of other calculations. And so if you are not accurate in your revenue forecast, what implications does that have for other metrics, other KPIs? And I'll give that to Ted, and then hear Kevin's comments.
Yeah, I think
that.
Actually Kevin has been doing a lot around this, even more. I mean, in terms of what he's been using with our products. Probably, Kevin, do you want to talk a little bit about how you sort of took that and automated even the additional metrics? I think that might be useful here.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the process, having gone live earlier this year, of really trying to automate and pull in the revenue forecast, combine it in our BI tool with our NetSuite actuals, and then the Ravana kind of revenue forecast. So that level of automation really is going to power us into 2022 as we try to, especially as of now we're a public company. We're going to be reporting on a very regular basis and making sure we're guiding our management team in the UK. I think, to Lauren's question, growth companies can get over their skis very quickly if they miss revenue targets, right? You're trying to mix, how do I grow my R&D and sales and marketing responsibly with managing that top line growth. And some companies raise lots of capital with the luxury that they can burn it. A lot of companies will have constraints. So either they have EBITDA targets or other kind of covenants that they have with banks. So missing revenue forecasts really can be a governor of how fast you can grow the business. So I think that's when, when we put together, right now it's December, I'm sure a lot of companies are going through their annual budget cycle, and they're starting with, if we can achieve X% of revenue growth, then we can do blah, 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 blah. And some companies don't have to operate like that with their capital constraints. Some companies do, but I think understanding and guiding the ability to deliver on your revenue empowers the rest of the organization to get what they need. So for me, it started and ends with revenue, being able to kind of make sure you're selling a product efficiently and effectively, and monetizing it. If you're missing on that, then you're going to have to compromise the rest of the business at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. And just concretely, think of all the KPIs that revenue is, and, we have a Chuck, thank you for your comment in the chat of, there's a lot of different terms and different definitions of terms, SaaS versus consumption businesses versus subscription businesses, and, even revenue versus ARR, and recognized revenue versus ARR. For some companies, it's ARR, and, annual recurring revenue is very similar to recognized revenue. And in some companies, it's very different. And that relates, to this whole problem, because then, if you're just selling a regular annual subscription to the same thing all the time to almost all your customers with only slight variations, as I think you said, Ted, that's pretty easy. You don't have that problem. The Salesforce just forecasts, and you can work on whether their forecast is accurate, whether they have accuracy about the close rate. But anything off of that, whether it's a subscription business, whether it's a services, tech-enabled services with some kind of recurring or consumption-based, a data business, there's just huge variations on these kind of things. So I'd love to just go back because I think it's really helpful for people to see. Can either of you give a really specific, without betraying any confidentiality, but just walk us through a very specific example, maybe each of you, where it was really tough, like what you had in the CRM and what you needed to forecast, and using sort of, and maybe Ted with the current companies that you're working with, so that we're referring to current systems and current things. But maybe you could start off by giving just walking us through an exact example.
Yeah, I can give you a couple. I mean, Kevin will be easy because he can talk about his pains. I mean, Kevin's issue went right. I mean, our main customer, when I started talking to Kevin, was their CEO, who was doing this in spreadsheets every day on his own because he didn't have the data to manage it. Because and now looking back on it, it makes sense because they were getting positioned to do a transaction. It's when this stuff, you mentioned it really, I think you mentioned it great. You don't want to wait till the end to have to deal with this stuff, Lauren. It's having the ability to deal with it and having it in your DNA. So when the people that are asking the hard questions come in, either at a raise for more equity or at an acquisition point, that you're not stumbling, because that level of confidence in where the growth is coming from is going to be what you're going to get valued for as a company. But back to the original question. I mean, I'm seeing, I have just the different customers. One customer, a decently sizable one, was managing 500 spreadsheets internally to do this, to forecast their revenue. So there were 500 spreadsheets basically going around on a biweekly basis with all the revenue data. So from a security issue, just one, from a governance perspective, that's just silliness to me that you would do that when you have systems that you can manage this in a more effective manner. We have customers that were realizing pretty sizable firms that when they did a large booking of revenue that was expected to come out over time, were marking like a 50 to 60% realization rate on the yield basically on that sale. Which, I mean, you think about lost opportunity there of what they thought they were going to get to what they were getting, is massive. And then when we talk, and I know there's a couple questions here around, small company. How does this matter for a smaller company on the SaaS side? We actually use the product ourselves to not only target our revenue growth from the deals that we have in our pipeline, but we're also modeling, cash. We're putting the cash points in there if the deal is a 3-year deal that's done now, that's great, that booking is there. We're actually modeling our billing cycles off of it prior to having a billing system, which gets expensive if you're a small company. And also looking at margin calculations. And now Kevin's company is doing the same. So like you said, Lauren, there's a lot of things that fall off of that revenue, actually off that pipeline booking forecast, that trigger a lot of metrics for the company. And there's a way of doing it better in our view versus, this sort
manual.
It's not just manual, it's disconnected. Because the team that owns the revenue forecast is finance, and finance is logic. Finance does their black magic in figuring out, okay, here's what the sales guys gave me. Now I'm going to take that and do something with it and give you a forecast. Our view is that logic that sits in the heads of those finance people can be codified, right? The things they do on that subset of customers are forecasting, all that can be codified back in the back end of the process to where someone just should have to click a button to look at what my revenue forecast is going to be at this point in time. And that's what we feel is critical. And that is for any model that's happening here, not just, consumption. This is for the easy SaaS. That's a critical one too.
It's funny, you just remind, when I started Opexengine, it was exactly the same thing. It's like,
Yeah.
we have to be able to automate this because it's ridiculous that every time you try and find benchmarks or you try and find the context for what you're doing, you call up the 5 or 10 people that you know, and they're not in the same company, same model or anything, but you just sort of cobble together a couple things and you go into your management meeting and say, well, these guys are doing this and they're doing that, so let's try and figure out what would work for us. And it just seemed like in this day and age, you can benchmark by automating it. You can, I love the expression that, you can take what's in the finance people's head that they're doing manually over and over again. So maybe Kevin, you could give again to the question of just really walk us through an example that you've confronted.
Yeah, and I'll go back to what Ted and I had worked on a few years ago. So we were dealing with disparate systems, right? Which is a challenge in any.
Everybody's got it.
Everybody's got it, right? So we would have large complex enterprise deals that would close in Salesforce. We would ship hardware and we would kind of get everything ready and it would go to the production system. And then on the other side was the ERP where we're billing and we're not seeing that revenue being realized. And so you kind of had this black hole of, well, it got closed in Salesforce, but if the revenue is not there, where is it? So it was really an intensive effort between myself and some of the business analysis team to dive through all the different reports, try and find the common pieces, the common references amongst those systems that we could start tying things together, do it manually to kind of come up with this aha moment that we realized we were deploying hardware that had software licenses to them, but they were sitting on the shelf because the enterprise customers were taking longer to deploy it than they had said they would, or they were buying spares with no intent to really actually deploy a license. So from that perspective, had we just blindly followed the bookings, here's what Salesforce has, we're going to immediately recognize that in a certain period of time, we would have been overly optimistic on our forecast. Once we realized how some of the enterprise companies were consuming or operating, we're able to go have conversations with them, actually get them to deploy a little faster, help them solve the problems as to why they can, how to deploy faster, but also realize that maybe some of the things we were selling were going to take longer to monetize. And so that's kind of the getting that data. And I think any good company, any best practice SaaS company is a data-oriented company, getting that data to understand where it was getting stuck and then taking a business action to go get it unstuck was critical. And I think that's really, for me, at least for Ravana, it starts in the CPQ process. And so from kind of the initial point of when someone's building a plan in Salesforce for us, we're capturing that. So whether it's even at signature, pre-signature, wherever that opportunity lies, we're having a visibility to it. So getting that visibility into the data, at least for us, is a lot earlier now. And that's been very helpful.
That's great. No, that's really good to hear. And I think that answers the question of how you're automating it by using this. We're not promoting a particular tool and we want to focus here also on the procedures you need to follow in order to automate it. But I think it's great to know that there is a tool that can help you and make that happen. So, talking about best practices in terms of, as the head of finance, as a CFO, what do you see as your recommendations? And maybe because of some of the questions that have focused on small companies versus large companies, it'd be helpful to get your sense of what do you recommend? And I'll ask, Ted first. What do you recommend that a small versus a large company do in order to be set up properly to automate this?
Want me to start, Lauren?
Yeah, that'd
Okay.
be great.
Yeah, we mentioned it's like getting started early. I think the longer you wait on some of these things as you grow, it just gets more and more complex. So if you can have building that ability to manage this even at a small size, really becomes helpful, and it will make the growth period much easier to deal with. And when I saw this at Telogist was, when we had 100 people, like not even 100 people in the company, I knew every one of the salespeople. I knew what they were doing. It's really simple to manage that stuff when you're small, but when the growth happens and it happens fast, it gets very complex very rapidly, in my view. And having the ability to have this stuff in place early on, when it's a much easier thing to do too when you're small, on building this up and having it there, I think makes it better. You and I have had this conversation, I think, before, around, this emergence of revenue operations. I mean, the fact that people are actually having that discussion right now, to me, is the sort of key thing we keep talking about across this whole conversation around this relationship between sales and finance. The fact that is becoming a thing is good. I get fearful, I think, a little bit, in the fact that it's sort of becoming a glorified sales ops role, and it's just a nice new name to throw on it. But the companies that are doing that well have this better relationship between, the sales team and the finance team. I mean, to me, having that trust in the data, because you're being better in managing it, really helps that relationship across the board. The amount of CFOs I talk to when I talk about this topic, and they go, "Oh yeah, that's great, but I don't trust that anything the sales forecast tells me." I mean, that's like a big red flag to me. Of, if you're not I mean, if that is the thing that's paying the bills, and you have no trust over that information, to me, that's a big red flag on a company that needs to really, focus on this and start measuring it. Because if you don't measure what's happening there, you can't change it, right? And that my view is we can do a better job of measuring all this information.
I'd say that's more of a management and organizational issue than anything else.
Yep.
It sounds like, Kevin, what would what are your key processes that you think a company should have in place in order to better manage this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first one that both large companies and small companies sometimes struggle with is you have to have the same item master. The same item master that exists in your ERP that you're billing off of is the same item master that should be in your CRM. Because if you're trying to take data from one to the other, or trace it where it went, a lot of times there's just not that connectivity, which is fine. But the systems don't have to be integrated, but you just need to make sure you have the discipline where you're starting with the same data set of what are you selling. I think the other challenge that everyone has is time, right? Everyone is working on forecasting. Everyone is spending time doing it manually. The question is, at what point is that time so arduous, or to get to an answer, or the answer is not good enough, that you feel you need to invest in the systems to kind of bring it to scale? And that differs for every organization, right? Ted's point at Telligis, we just threw bodies at it. We had the ability to kind of say, we need to keep moving. We don't have time to kind of do an RFP and put something together. We're just going to have to throw bodies on it. That we had the luxury of some Kleiner Perkins money to help us with that. So that was maybe a little easier. And I think more and more companies are realizing it's about being efficient and building for scale. And so as you look at that process, I think people need to be honest, because sometimes they go, "Oh, it's just not important." Well, it is important, right? If you're missing your revenue forecast, if you're not being able to commit to it, that's important. And I think you can do this. You can do this in Excel. People in this call are doing it in Excel today. How well do you do it? How good are you at Excel? How fast can you replicate it? And by the way, by the time you're done with it, are the answers just meaningful? That's really the challenge. And if you have a simple model and you're able to do this all quickly, then I think that works. But I think there needs to be an honest conversation amongst the finance team about their time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I hear it's a problem. I want to get really granular. What do you need in the CRM? What fields do you need in the CRM? What do you mean by, automate the revenue profiles across all deals? How do you tell someone who's listening exactly what that means?
I'm going to hit that, Lauren.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's laying when we talk about and I'm happy you have this up here because you talk about these things and you forget about them. So my memory is getting bad as I age here. It's the automating the profiles means by product, by what Kevin is saying, having by knowing each item and how the revenue profiles look off of them, be able to take that and codify it back into Salesforce. That's our view of what people should do. Of course, I'm a little bit biased because I built a product that does that. I'll be very clear and say that, but we feel that helps things along when you don't have to guess. You take what the logic is, like I said, take the recognition logic that resides in the FP&A team's heads and put that into the CRM system. And where it helps when you talk about fields. So that gets a little more complex. But just as simple as knowing what your revenue start dates are, right? If the close date is not the revenue start date, just knowing that gap could be a good thing to measure in Salesforce. Could be the same date, could be a different date. I know the question that came up saying, some SaaS models are pretty simple, not that big of a deal. Totally understand it, but knowing when the revenue starts, the number of months or years that you expect that contract to be, being able to take that data and utilize that to actually cast the revenue going forward.
Even especially in a month like December, when the close date might be December, but the start date's actually January. So is that growth this year or last year? Next year?
When my boss always, and this is the wonderful thing about compounded growth, but if you don't hit it, it compounds negatively too. Like we talk about churn, right? And there was a question about churn. Yeah, you can't, when you miss months in SaaS, you cannot get them back. It's a very good thing. It's an interesting thing about the model is when you get late on things, you can't make it up. And when we talk about, slippage of pipeline, if you got bookings that are occurring all in January, February, and March, those are very different from a compounding model to things that are closing in October, November, and December. So just having more understanding of close dates and what that means going forward on when that revenue is going to hit really will materially impact that forecast and that growth for the year. And I think that's where we got enamored with bookings, right? And I fell into that trap. But the bookings did not clearly translate into revenue. And again, my business model, other business models, you see this. You're by October, November, you're not actually even by the mid part of the year, you have no chance to get back on target again if you've missed by that one time.
One of the comments in chat is that the hardest part about forecasting is the compounding effect of churn and missed bookings. And the thing that's frustrating about that, there's real churn. And then I feel like as a CEO, there's real churn, and then there's sort of I don't want to call out accounting, but there's sort of accounting churn. It's like, to my point earlier, we're all, people have been marketing cash to, order to cash systems. So that's become kind of the buzzword, but it could be cash to implementation or provisioning or whatever. And, if you provision the new customer in January, then, or if you have a customer that renews in December, but they are provisioned in January for some reason, you've lost them, unless you have really liberal definitions of recaptured customers or sort of lapsed customers or whatever, terminology you want to use. But Kevin, do you have some comments about the whole churn and missing bookings issue?
Yeah, I think the best companies and what we've tried to do is look at this on a monthly basis, and you roll it up by part, by customer, so you understand what is changing month over month. And I think for us, ARR is an important metric, and I think a lot of the board of directors really like to see ARR because I think that's a good overall health. But I think focusing more on actually just MRR, just actual monthly, will allow you to see the puts and the takes each month of what happened. because I think sometimes you can have contraction in a healthy customer, right? Where they have something that changed and the customer is still in a good spot. There's nothing you did wrong. It's going to be fine in the long run, but you might have a month or a quarter where there's someone would look, oh, what happened? Is there a churn here? And the customer is just down for a little bit for a particular reason. So looking at a monthly basis will allow you to tell that story. I think, to Ted's point, you need to have it at a granular level. You need to have it built from the CPQ by item, because that allows you to then to dig in. Okay, great, we're seeing this is down. Okay, great, why is it down? It's this customer. Okay, what changed? Oh, it was this. And then you can kind of dig into it and have that feedback loop. I think, the challenge that we all face is we're moving so quickly and we're trying to sell very quickly. So how quickly can you report? How quickly can you then compare to those actuals to what your forecast was? Having that system, that process, that discipline is critical, because it's going to allow you to get a better understanding of your business and then take action on that. So
here's sorry.
One more quick comment, Laura, on the churn side. Companies are doing a better job of modeling those as sort of negative opportunities, and we view it that way. If you know the churn is coming and actually something is going to change on that outward forecast, you can actually model those as a negative revenue flow off of an opportunity that could be a churn opportunity in air quotes, but it's that. And then one last thing is, one thing I've always had a problem with is, and we haven't even talked about this like a whole other hour, is the managing of the run rate by these success teams. If there's one, you get visibility of the pipeline really well, but once these customers sort of go off of like, I'm a new customer and we have that forecast, managing that flow, that monthly flow of revenue from an existing base, and empowering those teams to see that data and manage those forecasts as well is also, we view, being very critical to knowing that. And what Kevin says, it could be just getting a heads up on a customer that has to take a breather, right? There isn't churn, there's no real thing, but the revenue is going to go away here for a 6-month period of time, or it may dip a few percent. Being able to manage and have a team that can provide you that information as well around customer health is important.
So what I'm hearing you say, if I understand it, is that the customer success team needs visibility to the revenue forecast, not just some kind of system that tells them, this is an active customer, but without any context around it.
Yeah, we struggle with having a very secure way of giving those teams that, and we feel like you can put that information in a CRM system where they can make their calls on the quarter, what's going to happen in their region, to provide a little more visibility of that sooner than later.
Yeah, and it's sort of, especially when you're talking about consumption-based customers, where the whole concept of customer success originally, I feel, came from engagement, not so much doing renewals. Mm-hmm. And consumption is like the perfect meter of engagement. And so customer success should be very tied into that. So we only have a couple of seconds left here, or a few minutes left. Can you just give me your top 1 to 2 very concrete suggestions that you would make to companies? And we can start with Ted, and then Kevin, what are the key specific takeaways that you want companies to follow from this conversation? So Ted?
Automate what you can automate. And then even if you have the data, monitor it and look at it and figure out how you can get better, right? I think that's the key thing. It's not just, oh, well, the forecast went down. Trying to
once done.
Figure out the why, right? And then the why can be where you can operationally improve why these things are occurring, or why you're not building what you want.
So automate that difference or whatever the problem was.
Yep.
And improve it. Great, thanks. Kevin, how about you?
So the first thing is kind of a macro level, which is you need to have a data strategy, especially as you do acquisitions and things like that. You need to have a roadmap of how you're going to, and have your data oriented and consume it. On a granular level, to me, it's you've got to have the discipline to go by item code. Don't go by customer, don't go by product family. It needs to, you start with item code. You can build all of those dimensions in, so you can quickly analyze and do cohort analysis. I think that's all great by industry, but you need to start with what is important to you, and that's going to be at the item code level.
That's great. Well, thank you both so much. I was going to also ask you what your favorite Netflix or book is, because this is sort of a nerdy conversation, and I wanted to make sure that there was something funny, especially in these days of COVID and everything else. But I'll share, my husband is obsessed right now with The Morning Show, which I think is on Netflix or Apple or something like that. But Ted, what's your favorite Netflix show?
And it's actually an Apple show too. Ted Lasso, I think, got me through the pandemic because it was actually something to laugh about after being miserable. And a good book. There's a book called American Nations, which I think is awesome with everything that we're dealing with now. It talks about sort of how regionally we've sort of ended up where we are now and the way we think and do things. Highly recommend that one too.
Oh, I'd love to read that.
Yep.
I just read Stacey Abrams' latest sort of legal thriller, which was really good. She's pretty amazing at what she's done. So Kevin?
I would recommend a book called The Accidental Superpower. It's about the United States and the rest of the world, but it's about just geopolitics and demographics. It's kind of an odd topic, but it was recommended by a friend, and I thought it was one of the best books I've read in the last decade.
It's a great book too. I've read that. So thank you, everybody. We'll be sending out a recording of this. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or Ted or Kevin. Emails are here, and we'll put that in the email follow-up as well. But thank you so much to both Ted and Kevin for taking the time to share their experience and advice with us today. Thanks.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.